Welcome to Pints in Politics. I'm your host, Dan Parsons. Pints in Politics, as you guys may know, is an event-driven podcast that brings diverse thought leaders together to discuss the most important issues of our day. And we do so while enjoying not only a craft beer, but also locally sourced craft cocktails. And so please pull up a bar stool and join us for the next few minutes as we discuss some fascinating issues with two people that I've known, one for a dang long time and the other for a less dang long time. But let me introduce our guests today. And I should tell you, for transparency, we did do some podcast sessions for this, and may or may not have involved alcohol, those first sessions.
They weren't 30 minutes long.
They weren't 30 minutes long, I'll tell you that. So anyway, let me introduce my friend Steve Thomlison. Steve and I actually have known each other for, you reminded me, 30 plus years.
It's a long time.
It's a long stinking time. And and for those of you who know Steve, he wears his age much better than I do.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and so a little bit about Steve. Steve's a sixth generation Nebraskan, originally from the Tri-Cities, from Kearney.
Kearney, that's correct.
And Steve reminded me 30 years ago, in 1988, we met for the first time when you were interning for United States Senator Dave Carnes.
That's right.
Here in Nebraska.
I was in D.C. when I first interned and then came back here in the state.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I was a staff. I was, fresh, barely shaving, young kid.
Dark hair,
no gray hair.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I worked on Senate staff. So how this happened, for those of you who are too young to remember this.
Me.
Including Brent Comstock. And we'll get to you in a minute. So Dave Carnes became a United States Senator at the ripe young age of 42 years old.
Yeah.
And that happened because Kay Orr had just been elected governor in the state of Nebraska. Ed Zrinski drops over dead of a heart attack.
In Omaha.
And so 3 months into her term, Kay Orr gets to say, you get to be the next United States Senator. So as a young attorney from Omaha, named Dave Carnes. So Dave needed, if you were a warm body and you were in the rooms, like, okay, you get to be on staff. So I was on staff, actually ran the first district's Senate office here in Lincoln, and got to know Steve back then. And then later, a few years later, that didn't last a long time.
Not a long time. No, not. That was a short stint.
So Dave wasn't successful in election. Bob Kerrey beat Dave Carnes in that election. And so I needed something else to do, so I ended up working for the Attorney General in the state capitol, Don Stenberg. And lo and behold, Steve also worked in the Capitol and worked for a state senator from Omaha.
That's right.
And if I were really good, I would have had a phone call from your office mate.
Bob Caldwell.
Bob Caldwell.
That's right.
Bob is the vice president of NEBCO.
Yep.
You and Bob.
We were roommates and we worked together.
Were the LA position for State Senator Kate Whittick from Omaha.
That's right, from Millard. And she carried the crime bill that year for the Attorney General. And so we got to work closely together on crafting a way to keep Nebraskans safe.
Yeah. And that was unheard of back then.
It was a great time. We did a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, that's how far back Steve and I go. Steve went on to serve as a congressional chief of staff in Washington, D.C. He's worked political campaigns for Congress, for governor, U.S. Senate, around the country, 3 international races, which we'll get into, including Chile, Canada, and Russia.
Oh, no.
We're going to talk about that. And in addition, Steve's a veteran. Thanks for your service.
Yeah.
You bet.
And serving 30 years with the Army National Guard,
That's right.
and where you served as a chaplain.
That's true.
And
Retired a year ago in June. Hit my 30-year mark and decided that was long enough.
wow. And so just fill in a couple other things. You were just in D.C. last week
That's correct.
to see some of your old bosses.
Yeah, I worked for Elizabeth Dole from North Carolina when she first ran for the U.S. Senate to replace Jesse Helms. And so it was a great opportunity wonderful opportunity to travel with Elizabeth and to, of course, Senator Bob. And so after the Senate, Elizabeth started the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, which honors veterans and their caregivers. She calls the caregivers, usually the spouse of the veteran, a hidden hero. So, young men and women who wear the nation's uniform, volunteer to go, they are sent off to war, and may be injured, maybe come home a paraplegic, and the spouse, who didn't raise the right hand, who didn't volunteer for any of this in regards to the military, is now a full-time caregiver for maybe somebody who's wounded.
And obviously she can relate to that because that's what she's done.
For Bob, that's correct. He was wounded grievously in World War II in Italy, and so and isn't able to dress himself. So she helps him get dressed every morning, and so she has really gone out of her way to help raise money for veterans and their caregivers, the hidden heroes. So it was the big gala in D.C. So I was back in D.C. With Senators Elizabeth and Bob Dole.
Wow. And how's his health?
He's doing great. He's 96 now and going strong. And he was at the event along with Michelle Obama. And so it was Tom Hanks, who's the president of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. So it was a wonderful gala.
How'd you get in there?
Charity, my friend. Charity.
Right,
And
right.
so-
Gratitude.
Well, so maybe you can share some of those photos with the audience.
Oh,
with
yeah,
us.
sure, yeah,
Steve,
absolutely.
Producer Steve, maybe
Yeah.
we can throw some of those up.
You bet, absolutely.
So that's cool. So, so obviously we could talk for a long, long time about war stories, but no pun intended, because you've been to war, you've been all over the world. But juxtapose the experiences you've had with our other guest, Brent Comstock. And Brent and I, so do the math. Can we do this someday when I say I've known you for 30 years? Somebody will have to
Physically,
wheel me in.
right. At the facility that you'll graciously be attending, yes.
Brent and I have worked together, and we've become compatriots in some campaigns, and I just enjoy his stories. And so my biggest challenge, producer Steve, is to hold this under an hour. So that's going to be my challenge. So Brent is an entrepreneur, a rural advocate, a venture capitalist, and keynote speaker. We can hire you out.
Right. Well, I'll bill you for the time after this. Right.
Roots in rural Nebraska, hometown Auburn, Nebraska, southeast Nebraska. Brent's professional journey began when you were just 12 years old.
And Steve was 60. Oh, were we not supposed to share that
Here
yet?
we go.
No, here we go. No, you're not, because you can't be.
Oh, I got a tally. I did it twice. Okay, all right.
But so when you were 12 years old, you actually created a company, which is now BCom Solutions.
It just would not die.
Yeah.
Did you have a fake ID for that too? Was that?
No, I had my mom. She drove me around to all of our customers, but she'd park a block away or so, just because it was embarrassing. Kind of. Some people were embarrassed by their mother taking them to like prom or something.
Right.
I was like, well, you can't take me to see my client, Mom.
I see.
That's just not acceptable.
That's fair enough.
Founder and CEO of BCom Solutions. Brent really has transformed the business from a little rural IT where your mom's driving you up to your client to now a digital company that is truly first class, consulting firm, political, and other clients as well, not only here in Nebraska, not only here just in Lincoln, Nebraska, but throughout the Midwest and throughout the country and even globally. So, graduate from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Duke University, where, I don't know what this is, a Robertson Scholar. So somebody in back home, or not back home, but back
Second
in
home.
Blue Country,
Right.
will understand the significance of a Robertson Scholar.
Right.
But why don't you tell us?
Right.
In other words, we lost you. The university lost you. The University of Nebraska lost you to Chapel Hill
Yep.
with a Robertson Scholarship.
Yep.
But thankfully you came home.
Right. So the Robertson Scholarships, for those of you that are probably more focused on the why did he go to UNC and Duke, because that just seems to be like a bad idea if you have any sort of sports inkling. But the Robertson Scholarship Program is a partnership, a financial and leadership program for both universities. So there are students at Duke that go to UNC, and there are students at UNC that go to Duke.
Okay.
Right. So fun program. Fun program. I bleed the lighter blue around March, though.
Very cool. Well, obviously, I am so over my head with having you two as my guests. And so, as tradition has it, as Pints and Politics fans know, this is the part of the program where we just briefly talk about what are we drinking. And so, let me introduce, because we've expanded from just pints, we just don't do pints anymore.
Well, I didn't get a pint of this old fashioned, so I was wondering if that was coming later.
In addition to craft beer, we've also branched out into what do our guests want to drink? What does the host want to drink? The calendar is turned, it's fall, it's whiskey, boys.
Right.
So we're drinking an old-fashioned a Woodford Reserve, which is a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, and this came from N Street on O Street.
Which is just the
Cheers.
perfect
Cheers.
marketing idea, right?
Yeah.
Cheers.
So I did okay.
I think I'll have another.
Yeah.
Is this the intermission, or do we do that? Oh, okay. All right.
And then the beer we're drinking is just from around the corner, Kincaider. So we are broadcasting from Fuse Co-working in the heart of the Haymarket. Parsons Public Relations office is up here. And so thanks to Fuse Co-working for letting us broadcast from up here. And so just around the corner, thankfully, is Kincaider Brewing, and Kincaider from Broken Bow, Nebraska. And so we're drinking their Oktoberfest. And this is the first sip I've had.
This is my 5th bottle, but
It's good. I like it. I like it.
A little history quiz. Anybody in the audience can play too. The name Kincaider, do you know?
Well, only because I
don't look at me.
read ahead.
Okay.
You cheated. You got notes all over the fucking place.
But there's a political connection.
That's
I
right.
love this.
Moses.
Yeah. So Kincaider comes from the 1904 amendment to the Homestead Act, which was written by Moses Kincaid, who's a member of the United States House of Representatives from dear old Nebraska. So cool. And he was a sponsor of the Kincaid Act, which had allowed homesteaders to claim up to, so I have lots of questions, 640 acres. Why 640? Some agriculture farm people might be able to tell us.
Well, no, I can't. But I always like to make it. You know, someone had really bad handwriting.
Yeah.
And so they just, you know, they were trying to put like 6,000 or something, and then they had one of these, and that's what.
640 acres of government land in western Nebraska. Homesteaders who gathered in Broken Bow, home to Kincaider Brewing, to claim property in the 37 counties in the general area of the Nebraska Sandhills were called Kincaiders. So there you go.
There you go.
So great beer right around the corner. Give them your love and business. All right.
We should also note, since we're drinking old fashions, the first time that the old fashioned cocktail appeared in print
You were there.
was in 1880 in the
see the
Chicago Tribune. And it was the occasion that a Democratic candidate had dropped out of the race for president.
No way.
And the Chicago Tribune reported that on the occasion of a Democratic candidate dropping out of the presidential race, they got together and they toasted and they had old fashions.
So there's so much, gentlemen, that we could talk about.
A lot.
A lot we could talk about. So, but because Brent does digital marketing, I wanted to get some impressions from, starting with Steve, from your history of, I suspect you saw digital marketing in its infancy in political campaigns, both in Nebraska and around the country.
Sure. Look, when Dan, you and I started working in politics, when we were Brent's tender age, campaigns didn't have websites. There wasn't, Al Gore had not invented the internet yet. And so there wasn't a notion of digital marketing. And the extent, I can still remember that we would try to, even voter files, the voter lists weren't digitized like they are now. So when we first got the list of registered voters, it was a photocopy from the county clerk or the election commission, and you had to go through it by hand. And there was a national list firm called Aristotle. They're still in business today. They do software today, but there's other companies now. Aristotle was the original. And I can remember I contracted with Aristotle to do something that had never been done before in the United States. And Aristotle's software engineers worked together. There was a brand new cutting edge technology.
So this would have been roughly what year?
90, 92, 94.
Okay.
And there was a brand new cutting edge technology called a Palm Pilot. and so this was a handheld device with a stylus, and it was just, all the rave.
Well, if you watched West Wing, right?
Sure.
I mean, Palm Pilots, the president had.
Right.
Yeah.
So I came up with this idea that Aristotle would work with Palm Pilot to develop a program that we could put the voter file on the Palm Pilot, and we hired college students with Palm Pilots, and they went to the county courthouse and they entered voter history.
By hand.
By tapping on the stylus.
By like pinky finger.
Yeah. Brent Comstock voted in the primary, voted in the general, turn the page, the next guy. And then they would, about what they could do by hand in a day, they would go back, and that's about what the Palm Pilot could hold for memory, and they would sync it and download that and upload the next days, and they would spend 3, 4, maybe a week at a county courthouse, and then drive to the next. And we were really on the edge. Aristotle and Palm Pilot thought this was great stuff. Nobody in the nation was doing this, and of course we were looking to.
What race were you? What were you working on?
Yeah, so this would have been both the Barrett campaign when Speaker of the Legislature Bill Barrett ran for Congress to replace Virginia Smith in Nebraska's 3rd district, and then again in 92, Dan Erwiller was on the Public Service Commission running for re-election in the great western Nebraska 3rd, and
which is now the entire state.
And now the entire state, and then also the Christensen for governor or for Congress race in Omaha.
So pause that. So let's do fast forward for those listeners, and we've got a variety of audience here. We've got obviously old-fashioned fans. We've got craft beer fans, and we've got political fans.
Right. And some people get to like all of them.
Like us.
And we have Brent fans, too.
Right. No, there were 4 people that weren't.
So obviously there's some people listening and viewing this podcast that know something about politics, and then just the casual viewer who is interested in this stuff. So I'm fascinated by that origin of going into by hand to county clerks. Just tell our listeners, Brent, of what that process is today.
Well, now it evolved from that, and then there was the era of the ad agencies were doing digital, and then it was the era of now fundraising will be digital, and then there was, even up until 2016, there was the digital department, right? And it was, anything that was digital-ish would fit into there. But now, in 2018, 19, and 20, everything has a digital component. So there's digital field, digital fundraising, digital, there's video, there's someone who sits there and makes sure that the memes for their candidate fit the culture that they want to create. There are people that are building logo styles for a specific city to have this thing for that app for these things. And it's now become the thing that people hire first. Our company has seen that. We've been doing this for a couple of cycles, and it used to be we were the people that were hired at the end when you had a little extra ad money and you go, what the hell's digital? Let's throw some shit at that kid and see what happens. And now, the races that we're working on now, the things that I did today, it's us and the candidate. Oftentimes before the campaign manager exists.
Exactly, and we'll get into some of those details here in a minute, but I'm just fascinated of really relatively in a short time, we've gone from the early stages of digital marketing with a creative young consultant directing a national company to do that, to now there are companies around the country who specialize
Hundreds.
Just in a period of 20 years.
Yeah.
It's an example. My good friend, the junior senator from Nebraska, Ben Sass, talks about the fact that the world is now in its fourth major economy.
Yep.
We started with hunter-gatherers. We moved to an agricultural society. We moved for a few hundred years, and we moved to the Industrial Revolution. Yep. That's been 100 years, and now we're in this fourth age that we don't really know what to call it, but it's a technological or a digital age, and it's influencing everything that we do, and including politics.
Yep.
And that now campaigns spend a majority of their advertising dollars in a digital footprint versus on broadcast media. And so that's...
talk about that a little bit. Talk about the era of the heyday of where you were.
Sure.
Local, state, national politics, where the majority of money was spent on television.
Well, for a long time, again, the 90s and early 2000s, 50% of your advertising budget was right off the bat designated for broadcast TV. And if you could do more, 60, 70% for broadcast TV, then that was, you were really doing well. And the notion of even, I remember the first discussions about should we spend some money on this new thing called a website, that people would use.
Singular website with like a page.
That you could dial up on, through AOL or something, and that you could go, or a bulletin board or something that you would, have some text things, and even the notion of spending money on that or on software to do lists was.
That was.
A lot of people really question that strategy, and now we're in this cycle for sure, but maybe even last cycle. I'm not entirely sure at what point in time it tipped that campaigns now invest more money in digital advertising than they do in broadcast.
Can I put you on the spot before you dive in? Can I put you on the spot? And can you think of the first political campaign that you could, in post-election, point to a success of digital marketing? Put you on the spot.
Yeah. Well,
or where was the tipping point where, because we all know, I think we all think of Obama.
Yeah.
As kind of the gold standard of, oh my goodness.
Who did it successfully.
Successfully,
yes. So for your experience in campaigns, maybe obviously prior to Obama, that everyone said, oh my gosh, what just happened?
Well, I think that what happened is that there's various layers, right? We started with trying to digitize voter history, right, as a means of targeting. And then we would add to that a DMV list, what kind of vehicle that you had, or maybe we would add to that, how much your house was, tax evaluations. And so we would just start layering data on top of that and trying to get more data. We'll get to, I think, at some point in time, or Cambridge Analytica, which is sort of that on steroids of how many pieces of data that have been added to that. And at each point in time, it's simply trying to influence and relate to the voter more directly.
So talk about a success, and I want to get to Cambridge Analytica. I don't want to lose track of what we're doing here tonight.
Well, if you have a nightmare, it's probably something about Cambridge Analytica. They know that, so we could get to them.
We're going to get to that.
Yeah.
I want to spend some time on that. So, Brent, maybe just respond to that and talk about what an example in your world of success.
Sure. Well, I think for the people that like the beer and the old fashions more, it's like going from, remember Clippy on Microsoft Word, the little paper clip that boinked up and down.
Uh-huh.
Clippy is, the great grandfather of Alexa and Siri. And it's the same evolution where you took, Clippy had like 4 things that he could do. One was annoy the shit out of you. And then the other 2 were turn him off and, do other things. But it's evolved to the point where now you infuse that digital component into everything. And I think, Al Gore did a lot of things in the technology era with campaigns. And you had Howard Dean, you had all these different people that were like, oh, we're going to do these different components. But it wasn't until 2008 when you had a candidate who won who embodied it so greatly. It's no different than in 2016 when there were articles that were written, front pages that were written that you can find about the first female president of the United States that the night of people were up changing the images and like, oh shit, what is this? So I think that's how that's been perceived. As far as success stories in this, I think success, the question is for us as political operatives, our success is when our candidate wins. So, but to the average person, for people that have garnered it, which Trump is the penultimate of that. I wouldn't enjoy saying that, but it's true. But then you think about what the average person, or even the average political person, thinks of who's sleek and sexy and digital. It's Beto O'Rourke, he hasn't won. It's MJ Hagar, she hasn't won. It's all these different people that do these cool videos, that do these cool digital pieces, and they're cool. Some of them are partners of our, in that context. And it's a question of, do you win online by getting money, or do you win online by winning? And in the industry, it's by winning, but to the public, it's like, he's the Instagram and the Facebook Live candidate.
Right. Well, there's so many components to a successful campaign.
Right.
It's amazing. So let's transition to Cambridge Analytica. And I just want to, I should have said this at the beginning. We have one guest who's primarily represented Republican candidates throughout his career.
Or only versus primarily.
Thank you. Yes. And my other guest who has primarily
happily
represented Democratic candidates. And your host, I'm smashed right in the middle. Kind of like the muddling of this fine
Wow, that was great.
That was great. What I've done.
That was well played.
So I want to hear these war stories of Cambridge Analytica and how both of you have not only knowledge but experience, and so this could be another segment. But if you haven't seen the documentary on Netflix called it's about Cambridge,
The Great Hack.
The Great Hack.
Yeah.
Watch that and then come back and we'll have a discussion.
And don't even worry about there are truths to that, and there are some like, the important part is, I watched it with some friends that aren't in the industry, and they go, I didn't even know that was possible. And while some of the mechanics of that I don't know are true, I don't particularly want to know. I think it would be indicted if I knew the answers to some of those things. The capability exists.
So give a brief synopsis of what WTF Cambridge Analytica.
Worshiping together with faithfully. So Cambridge Analytica, it was the data mining operation that ultimately got Trump elected in the tech component. He got elected in a lot of different ways that you could argue, but from a tech component, UK-based firm that arguably leveraged the flexibility and the vulnerability in Facebook and other tech companies' privacy policies. When you sign up for 1 million things a week and you scroll, and click accept, there's a lot of shit in there that you're missing. And they leverage that to better understand people that were using the internet, because you use Facebook, and young people, myself, and a lot of, people are moving away from Facebook as their primary social network, but everything's tied in with that. If you have the option to create your own username and password or to sign up with Facebook, you sign up with Facebook, that data goes in.
So what was the result of that invasion of our privacy?
Well, the ultimate result was that a presidential campaign was able to buy that service legally, arguably, but they were following in plain speak. It was mostly legally, and I say that coming from the other side, but they took advantage of the fact that Facebook saw themselves as a social networking outlet, and even until 2015 and 16, people saw Facebook as where you check in with grandma, where you post pictures of your kids. Now you think about Facebook, the farmer in western Nebraska, rancher in northwestern Nebraska, thinks about Facebook as that thing that's getting into the elections.
So, look, when I was working with Aristotle to augment
the philosopher
list,
or the software company?
Yeah.
Okay, I had to say it. Okay, I'm done.
So
I
that's
promise.
a third drink that you now owe me. That's number
well,
3.
it's the fifth time I've said it, so we're okay. All right.
And so, look, and of course, look, the goal here is that what we're doing is we're looking for more data about each voter so that we can refine and target our message. If your most important issue is jobs or the economy, then as a campaign, I don't need to talk to you about crime or immigration or social. I need to talk to you about what your issue is. And so it's how do we find that? When I was working with Aristotle to talk to voters who voted, and then to tailor that message to issues that you care about. Facebook was in its infancy, and we had discussions with Facebook about trying to match the voter file of voters in an area with Facebook users to be able to get an email or to be able to target messages. And at that point in time, Facebook, I was quite excited about the potential.
Yeah.
Facebook wasn't allowing that direct sale of data.
Because you recognize, as a political operative ahead of your time, you recognize the value of that data.
You bet, absolutely. And so what Cambridge Analytica was able to do is, rather than purchase necessarily the data directly from Facebook, they simply created apps or created gimmicks
APIs,
online that people would sign up and answer questions and give you that data. And so Facebook Analytica worked with psychologists to come up with a model to indicate persuasion techniques and likelihood of being able to be persuaded, all from data that people clicked on to make yourself look old or to answer questions about yourself. And then that data was collected, matched against a voter file, and then targeted back at you. It's consumer advocacy on steroids.
Right. So then what happened with that information then? So in San Antonio, Texas, there was the farm, or
by the way, a plug to my brother. I have a brother in San Antonio.
Right.
The Riverwalk.
Who could help all of us.
He could.
Right.
Psychologist.
Right.
Hi, Trey.
Mainly him. It's not me. It's him.
So
yeah.
Maybe
traveling.
We should go to San Antonio to the Riverwalk and do the next podcast
the next episode
there.
And
broadcast
Parsons
from the podcast.
Right.
And
Parsons Public Relations will sponsor
that's right.
that
Yes.
trip.
Yes.
Right.
I like.
But what's interesting about that is then they take that and you see a Facebook ad and you and in 2008 and 2012 talk about evolution in a very short time. If you want to know how quickly this industry is growing, look at the amount of digital spend from 2008 until now. It's growing. In 2016, Hillary's campaign spent $96 million. This 2020 cycle will be over $3 billion. In digital spend between presidential, U.S. Senate, and so forth. But in 2016, in San Antonio, Brad Parscale, which this will be the impact of, or the validation to what I said in the beginning about how digital is now everything. Brad Parscale was a web designer from Kansas, moved to Texas, had a web design firm not dissimilar to BCom, pre-political BCom, and he got this client. And that client was the Trump Hotel organization. Now you Google Brad Parscale, he is the campaign manager for Trump 2020, and what he did, because he was from San Antonio, or lived in San Antonio, he based the digital operation, and then Cambridge Analytica they sent people to work there in San Antonio, and so if you received an ad, and I received an ad, they might look the exact same, except for maybe in one of those surveys that Steve was talking about, you said something about the color blue, and I said something about the color green. You saw the same thing in blue, I saw the same thing in green, and that's how you got these people that in 2016 that thought, politics isn't for me, but psychologically speaking, which Cambridge Analytica was arguably an analytics, mind-based firm that was taking the human brain and how you behaved online and using that to move people to do something. That's how they built their advertising strategy.
Okay, so we're running out of time. So here's what I'd like to do. First of all, I'm going to pledge to both of you and to our audience, we have to continue this conversation in another. So for me, as we approach the 2020 election,
right.
There's no way that I can't have you guys back, or I can't ask you back. You don't have to come back.
Well, he's going to Russia, he said.
If there will be drinks, I will be happy
I
to come
will
back.
certainly provide drinks. So that's the first observation as we're running out of time, to have you guys back. Because I do, in kind of closing, what does the 2020 election look like then? 60 seconds from both of you. What does that 2020 election, based on what happened with Cambridge Analytica, and without even going into what's going on in Washington and impeachment hearings and what does the 2020 election look like as far as a digital footprint from both parties?
Well, I think, first of all, you've got 20 plus Democratic candidates in the primary. They're all looking for their big break, and they get those two big breaks in one of two. They get that big break in one of two places: in a debate or somehow online. Something clever, something snarky, something comes out against them or for them.
I love that, by the way.
Oh, it's
Ask me about we need fewer farmers. I did.
Yeah.
I did not write that line.
So that's the second episode. Yeah.
Yes.
So when when you think about it, that's one thing to think about. In the end, though, from a capitalism standpoint, these companies have to make sure that they are doing things that are fair and equitable, because Republican, Democrat, Independent, I don't think any true American wants to know that someone in the Ukraine or someone in Russia can buy Facebook ads to influence their election. If they do, then, well, that's a whole other podcast on patriotism.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I mean, when you think about the raw bits of information, Trump is outspending everyone online. He's outspending everyone and outraising everyone online. Everyone is trying to figure out, how do we find that digital niche that we can get into? When you go into the general election, which I'm assuming is probably when our next gathering will take place, maybe we'll have a few less than 45 people in the one side. There has to be a way. Trump embodied this thing where he spoke to people in a way that was where they were. I mean, at the time that they were, he spoke to people in every part of the country, and that digital piece, you can automate everything, but Trump didn't win on automating things. He won on digging into these vulnerable pockets of people. And you have to think about, okay, in 2020, how do we make sure that whoever is going to win, I would like to see perhaps someone different in the White House, but whoever is going to win, from a digital strategy standpoint, I would hope that however they're doing that is an authentic way, and a way that, sure, whoever raises the most money might win, but that we're not extrapolating, say, people in rural America and giving them ads that aren't necessarily true just because we can.
You get the last word.
Look, we're going to see a cycle that is going to reach a new zenith, a new height of persuasive technology and using micro targeting on steroids to we are in the midst of an information warfare battle. And along with that, along with persuasive technology of trying to reach voters, also comes digital deception, and comes disinformation at a strategic and digital level. And we're going to see this on a level that we've never seen before. And so it's going to require a more discernment on a part of consumers to figure out and to form their vote and their involvement in the political process. And we as a nation have to figure this out. We've got to figure out this new digital economy. We have to figure out digital information warfare. Because if we don't, it's plutonium, and it's powerful, and we don't want it to blow up our democracy. We want it to be an asset to our democracy, but we've got to learn how to do it right.
Hopefully this, my goodness, hopefully this is an example of Republican, Democrat, moderate, conservative, being
Liberal.
I didn't know you were liberal.
being able to, over craft beer and a craft cocktail, discuss politics. So thanks, guys, very much. Let me thank, as we wrap up, first of all, pointing to the camera, our Pints and Politics producer, Steve Van Hoosen, Kathy Plunkett Photography for the still photography that you will see coming out of this.
Right.
Kim Remington, who's the operations manager at Parsons Public Relations. Pints and Politics theme music. You can click your fingers along to Max Rodenberg's original music to Pints and Politics. Fuse Co-working and Parsons Public Relations for this beautiful site. And to my guest, my friend Steve Thomlison.
Thank you very much.
And my friend Brent Comstock.
From along the way.
For along the way, gentlemen, thanks. And I'm sorry, a fresh Pints and Politics can be heard every fourth Friday of the month on pintspolitics.com, iTunes, Stitcher, all your favorite podcast platforms. Follow us on Facebook, on Twitter.
On your Palm Pilot.
On your Palm Pilot.
Your iPod, you don't even know what these things are.
He doesn't.
We got to get a museum to show him what these are. We got to stay at the museum. Yeah.
And the video on YouTube. So, gentlemen, thanks so much.
Cheers.
Oh, there's
Cheers. Cheers.